3 years ago, my mother handed me a paper plate with cold turkey and told me to eat on the freezing porch because my janitorial uniform would embarrass her wealthy guests. I ate alone in my car and drove away forever. Today, my golden child brother strutted into my corporate boardroom, begging for a data cover-up to save himself from federal prison. He assumed I was the receptionist. When he realized I owned the multi-million-dollar company holding his fate, his jaw dropped. Our family group chat went dead silent for 3 minutes before my phone rang 62 times in 1 hour. My name is Morgan. I am 31 years old, and I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Forensics. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever turned your family's ultimate betrayal into your greatest success. The conference room on the 40th floor of my building overlooked the sprawling, sun-drenched canopy of Buckhead, Atlanta. The glass walls were soundproof, designed to keep the city noise out and corporate secrets in. I sat at the head of the black marble table, running my hand over the smooth surface. For the last 45 minutes, I had been listening to my executive assistant expertly stall the two desperate people waiting in my lobby. The heavy glass door finally swung open. My older brother Trey strode in with the kind of aggressive chest-out confidence that masked a man on the brink of absolute ruin. He was 34 years old, impeccably dressed in a custom suit, the very picture of success that my parents paraded around their megachurch. Right behind him was his wife Lauren. Lauren came from a generation of wealthy white real estate developers. She wore a cashmere coat draped over her shoulders, her expression permanently fixed in a tight, condescending line. She was the woman my mother Vivian worshipped, the ultimate status symbol for our family integrating into the upper crust of Atlanta. Neither of them looked at the head of the table immediately. They were too busy barking at my assistant. We were told the chief executive would be ready at 2 o'clock, Lauren snapped, dropping her designer bag onto one of the leather chairs. My father plays golf with the managing directors of 3 different banks that use this firm. I expect punctuality. I apologize for the wait, Mrs. Davis, my assistant said smoothly, gesturing toward me. The chief executive is ready for you now. Trey turned around, his rehearsed charismatic smile already forming. Listen, we know Aegis handles discrete data audits and we need your help. His voice died in his throat. The smile shattered, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. His eyes widened, taking in my tailored navy suit, my styled hair, and the imposing leather chair I occupied. Morgan, he breathed out the name, catching on his tongue like a fishbone. Lauren frowned, her pale eyebrows knitting together as she squinted at me. Trey, who is this? Is this your sister, the dropout? She turned her gaze to me, her lips curling into a smirk. Did you get a job here as a receptionist or something? Sweetie, we need to speak to the person in charge. We have a highly sensitive financial matter. I did not move. I did not blink. I simply tapped the screen of my tablet, sending the projection to the massive screen mounted on the wall behind me. The glowing blue logo of Aegis Forensics appeared, followed immediately by a sprawling web of encrypted banking nodes. I am the person in charge, Lauren. I said, my voice calm, cold, and resonating through the silent room. I founded Aegis Forensics 3 years ago. I own 85% of the equity. I am the chief executive officer. Trey stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the conference table. That is impossible, he stammered, shaking his head. You clean floors. Mom said you were working the night shift at some commercial cleaning company. You dropped out of medical school. You are broke. I was cleaning floors, I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the marble. 3 years ago exactly. I cleaned commercial office buildings from midnight until 6 in the morning because Mom and Dad cut off my tuition and locked me out of my own bank accounts when I decided I did not want to be their trophy doctor. This is a joke, Lauren scoffed, though her hands were visibly trembling as she looked at the complex data structures on the screen. Trey, tell her to stop playing games. We do not have time for this. Let us talk about time. I cut in, my tone sharpening into a blade. Let us talk about Christmas Eve 3 years ago. Do you remember, Trey? Trey swallowed hard, his throat working nervously, but he could not hold my gaze. I had just finished a double shift, buffing the floors of a corporate high-rise. I continued, making sure every word hit its mark. I drove my beat-up car through a sleet storm to Mom and Dad house because Vivian had texted me to come for family dinner. But when I got there, I was not allowed inside. Do you remember why, Lauren? Lauren crossed her arms defensively, looking away. My parents were there, she muttered. It was our first holiday together. We were trying to make a good impression. Right, I smiled, though there was zero warmth in it. Your parents were there. And according to Vivian, I smelled like industrial bleach. I looked exhausted and low class. She did not want her wealthy white in-laws to see her youngest daughter wearing faded scrubs and cheap sneakers. So Vivian set the dining table for 10 people. She brought out the fine china, the silver cutlery, the crystal wine glasses. And for me, I stood up slowly, towering over them from my side of the table. Vivian put a scoop of cold turkey, a dollop of instant mashed potatoes, and a single dinner roll on a flimsy paper plate. She set it on the freezing front porch next to the welcome mat. She opened the door, handed me a plastic fork, and told me I was not clean enough to eat inside. She told me to eat quickly and leave before your parents saw me. Trey had drained of all color. Morgan Mom was just stressed. You know how she gets about appearances. You did not have to hold a grudge. I did not hold a grudge, Trey, I said softly, walking around the table to stand directly in front of them. I ate my cold turkey alone in my freezing car. I drove away. And I used the money from scrubbing floors to rent server space. I used the quiet of the night shifts to code the forensic tracking algorithm that is currently displayed on that screen. The same algorithm your failing investment fund is desperately trying to buy right now. Lauren darted her eyes to the screen, panic finally breaking through her arrogance. How do you know about our fund? Because I pressed a button on a remote in my hand, and the screen shifted to display a massive red deficit. When your assistant begged for this emergency meeting yesterday, I ran a preliminary diagnostic on your public filings. You are not just looking for an audit tray, you are looking for a cover-up. You are short exactly $15 million of investor capital, and you need Aegis to doctor the metadata before federal investigators knock on your door. The silence in the room was absolute. Trey looked as though the floor had just vanished beneath his custom shoes. You are going to help us, Trey demanded, desperation cracking his voice. We are family, Morgan. If this gets out, Lauren family firm will pull their backing. I will go to prison. You should have thought about family 3 years ago when you looked out the living room window, saw me shivering on the porch with a paper plate and laughed. I replied, turning my back on them and walking toward my chair. Lauren stepped forward, her face flushed with a mixture of fear and pure entitlement. Listen to me very carefully, Morgan, she said, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. My father is one of the most powerful real estate attorneys in Atlanta. Our family has connections you cannot even begin to fathom. If you do not help us fix this data, I will have my father law firm tie your little startup in so much litigation you will be scrubbing floors again by Christmas. You think a college dropout can go toe-to-toe with my family? You are completely out of your depth. I slowly turned back to face her, completely unfazed by her display of inherited power. It was the exact same condescension she had used since the day she married my brother. The assumption that her wealth and status could bully anyone into submission. Your father relies on the very banks that currently employ my software to secure his real estate deals, Lauren, I stated calmly. My algorithms monitor the compliance of his largest lenders. If you sue me, the discovery phase alone will expose Trey missing $15 million to the public record, making it a federal crime. So please have your father call his lawyers. I would love to see how fast old money runs when the words wire fraud and embezzlement hit the local news. Lauren opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The threat had been neutralized with simple, undeniable facts. She looked at Trey, expecting him to interject to exert some sort of control over his younger sister, but Trey was paralyzed. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of success, and now the facade was cracking wide open. Trey pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking violently as he opened our family group chat. It was a chat I had been silently sitting in for 3 years, never participating, just watching their perfect lives unfold. I watched his thumbs fly across the screen, typing frantically. My own phone rested on the marble table. The screen lit up with a notification. I did not need to pick it up to know what it said. He was warning our parents, telling them that the daughter they had discarded was now the only person standing between him and a federal indictment. telling them that the embarrassment of the family held all the power. The group chat went dead silent for exactly 3 minutes, the reality of the situation washing over them, and then my phone began to vibrate. Once, twice, 10 times. The screen flashed with incoming calls from my mother, then my father, then my sister Kelsey. Over and over the screen lit up with their desperate attempts to reach me. 62 missed calls in the span of a single hour. I looked at my brother and his wife. "Security is on their way up," I said, not breaking eye contact. "Get out of my building." Two heavily built security guards stepped through the glass doors right on cue. Trey tried to maintain some semblance of dignity, smoothing his tie and lifting his chin, but the tremor in his hands gave him away. Lauren snatched her designer bag from the leather chair, her face flushed with a mix of rage and absolute terror. They walked out flanked by my guards without saying another word. The heavy doors clicked shut behind them, sealing the silence back into the room. I stood alone in the center of the boardroom. On the marble table, my phone was still vibrating, the screen illuminated with Vivian's name again. I picked up the device, pressed the power button, and held it until the screen went completely black. Tossing it into my briefcase, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the Atlanta traffic far below. For 3 years, I had wondered how this moment would feel. I had imagined it during the grueling night shifts, while my hands bled from harsh cleaning chemicals. I had dreamed about it while eating cheap ramen in a freezing studio apartment. I thought it would feel like vindication. Instead, it felt like pure focused power. I packed my tablet and left the office, heading down to the private underground parking garage. Driving home to my penthouse, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The first domino had fallen. The next morning started exactly like any other Tuesday. I woke at 5, completed a strict workout routine, and reviewed the overnight international market reports over black coffee. I arrived at the Aegis Forensics building at 7 sharp, returning the greetings of my staff as I made my way to the executive elevator. By 8:30, I was deep into an acquisition file when the intercom on my desk buzzed. It was Marcus, my head of security. His voice was unusually tight. "Ms. Brooks, we have a situation at the main reception desk on the ground floor. 2 individuals are demanding access to the executive elevator banks. They are refusing to leave and causing a significant disturbance. They claim to be your parents." I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. "Connect the lobby feed to my monitor, Marcus." A second later, the high-definition security footage popped onto my screen. There they were, Vivian and Desmond. My mother was dressed in her Sunday best, a tailored beige skirt suit, complete with a silk scarf and a pristine blowout. She looked ready for a magazine cover shoot about Atlanta elite church leaders. My father stood beside her, wearing his signature pastoral charcoal suit, exuding an air of righteous authority. He was currently pointing a finger at a security guard while Vivian pounded her palm on the reception desk. I watched the scene unfold with clinical detachment. Vivian was utilizing her classic intimidation tactics. She was leaning over the desk, invading the personal space of the receptionist, demanding compliance through sheer volume and aggressive body language. Desmond was playing the role of the reasonable but deeply offended patriarch. I pressed the intercom button. "Marcus, hold them there. Do not let them pass the turnstiles. I am coming down." I straightened my jacket, locked my computer, and walked to the elevator. The descent from the 40th floor took exactly 40 seconds. 40 seconds to prepare for the first face-to-face encounter with my parents in 3 years. The elevator doors slid open to the expansive marble lobby. The acoustics of the room amplified my mother's shrill voice. "I am telling you, my daughter owns this entire building. You will lose your job if you do not let us up right this instant." I stepped out of the elevator bay, and the sharp click of my heels echoed across the floor. Vivian and Desmond turned simultaneously. The angry tirade died on my mother's lips. She stared at me, taking in the expensive cut of my suit, the confidence in my stride, the absolute authority radiating from my presence. It was a stark contrast to the girl in the dirty janitorial uniform she had banished to the porch. "Morgan," my father said, stepping forward with his arms open wide, preparing to orchestrate a touching family reunion right in the middle of my corporate lobby. "Morgan, sweetheart, we have been so worried." I raised a single hand, stopping him dead in his tracks 5 feet away from me. Do not take another step toward me, Desmond, I commanded, keeping my voice level but loud enough for the security personnel to hear. My father dropped his arms, his pastoral smile faltering. Vivian quickly stepped in front of him, switching her strategy seamlessly from aggressive elite to wounded mother. Morgan, please, she cooed, clutching her designer handbag against her chest. We were so shocked when Trey called us yesterday. We had no idea you were here in Atlanta. We had no idea you were running this company. We have missed you so much. Why did you not return our calls last night? I looked at her, noting the complete lack of genuine emotion in her eyes. You missed me, Vivian. That is fascinating. You did not miss me when you sold my paid-off car to buy Kelsey a wedding dress. You did not miss me when you changed the locks on the house while I was at a study group. You did not miss me when you forced me to eat scraps in the freezing cold because I was an embarrassment to your wealthy white guests. Desmond puffed his chest. Morgan, we are a family grounded in faith. We forgive. Your brother is in a terrible situation, and God blessed you with resources to help him. You have a moral obligation to provide the $5 million he needs. I let out a harsh laugh. You want me to commit federal fraud to save the golden child? The answer is no. Leave right now. I will ruin you. The silence in the lobby was deafening following my threat. Desmond stepped back, his pastoral facade crumbling into genuine anger. You would threaten your own flesh and blood, he demanded, his voice echoing off the marble walls. I am a respected leader in this community, Morgan. If you think you can disrespect me in your little glass tower and get away with it, you are sorely mistaken. Vivian realized aggression was failing, so she pivoted back to tears. Her hands trembled as she reached out, though she dared not cross the invisible line I had drawn. Morgan, please, she begged, her voice cracking with practiced precision. I am your mother. I carried you. I gave you life. We only sold your car because Kelsey needed a wedding dress that fit our family image. You were just sitting at home depressed after dropping out. You did not need a vehicle. We needed to protect the family reputation. You have to understand the pressure I was under. I stared at her, feeling absolutely nothing. You stole my paid-off car, Vivian. You forged my signature on the title transfer while I was asleep, exhausted from working overnight. You sold it for $8,000 to buy a designer gown for a daughter who was marrying a man she had known for 3 months. And when I woke up and found my car gone, you told me I was being selfish for ruining her special day. You told me to take the bus to my janitorial job. You are a bitter, unforgiving woman, Morgan, Desmond said. We came here offering you a chance to redeem yourself, to be part of this family again. We are offering you grace. Trey made a mistake, but he is a good man. If you do not give us the $5 million, his life is over. Then his life is over, I said, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. And if you do not leave my building right now, I will have Marcus arrest you for trespassing. I will gladly hand over the lobby security footage to every local news station in Atlanta. I am sure your congregation would love to see their pastor begging a janitor for $5 million in stolen funds. The 2 security guards stepped forward, moving with swift professional efficiency. They flanked my parents, leaving them no choice but to retreat toward the revolving glass doors. Vivian was weeping loudly now, performing for the few remaining onlookers, while Desmond muttered curses under his breath. I walked to the elevator. Just as I pressed the button, the glass doors swung open. Lauren marched through the entrance. The sharp clatter of her designer heels hitting the marble floor made me pause. My brother's wife looked completely different from the panicked woman I kicked out yesterday. Today she wore a sharp white suit, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, her blue eyes blazing with absolute entitlement. She carried a thick manila envelope. She marched straight toward the reception desk, her gaze locked onto me. Marcus immediately stepped into her path, raising a hand to stop her. Let her through, I commanded, stepping away from the elevator. I wanted to see exactly what kind of desperate play the old money elite had cooked up overnight. Lauren stopped a few feet away from me, her lips curved into a triumphant smirk. You really thought you won yesterday, Morgan, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. You thought you could just humiliate my husband and threaten my family without consequences. Did you really believe a college dropout could outsmart a law firm that has been running this city for 4 generations? I kept my posture relaxed, refusing to give her the reaction she craved. State your business, Lauren, or join your family outside on the sidewalk. Lauren lifted the manila envelope and slammed it down onto the polished surface of the reception desk. The loud smack echoed through the lobby. She leaned forward, resting her hands on the desk. That is a formal lawsuit, Morgan. My father firm filed it in federal court this morning. We are not asking for your $5 million anymore. We are taking your entire company. On what grounds, I asked. Intellectual property theft. Lauren smiled. 3 years ago, you worked as a late-night cleaner at my father corporate headquarters. You had unrestricted access to the executive floors. We are claiming that the foundational code for your predictive algorithm was stolen from our proprietary servers during your shifts. You did not invent anything, Morgan. You are just a thief who got lucky. I stared at her, letting the sheer audacity of the lie wash over me. You are accusing me of stealing an algorithm from a real estate development firm. I laughed quietly, letting the absurdity settle into the space between us. That is pure fiction. Lauren shrugged casually, adjusting her expensive watch. It does not matter if it makes sense to you, it matters what we can convince a judge to believe. My father knows every federal judge in this district. We have the resources to tie your company up in litigation for the next 10 years. We will freeze your assets. We will subpoena your clients. We will destroy your reputation before you even see the inside of a courtroom. You are going to sign Aegis Forensics over to Trey. You are going to step down as chief executive. If you do exactly what we say, my father will graciously drop the criminal charges. If you fight us, you will go to federal prison for corporate espionage. I looked at the envelope on the desk. Then I looked at Lauren. The threat was real. Lauren turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She paused at the glass doors, looking back over her shoulder. You have 24 hours to resign, Morgan. Enjoy your last day at the very top of your fake corporate empire. The glass doors clicked shut behind Lauren, leaving a heavy silence in the lobby. I looked at the thick manila envelope resting on the reception desk. The crisp white label bore the crest of Davis and Sterling, the most ruthless old money law firm in Atlanta. I picked it up, feeling the physical weight of Lauren-inherited privilege. Breaking the seal. I pulled out the legal documents. It was an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. They were not just suing me. They were petitioning a federal judge to freeze my personal and corporate bank accounts, pending an investigation into intellectual property theft. I slid the papers into the envelope. My pulse remained steady. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my lead counsel. Prepare for an aggressive injunction from Davis and Sterling, I instructed as I walked toward the private executive elevator. They are claiming code theft. I am heading to the secure off-site server facility now to lock down our source code provenance. Have the legal team meet me there. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the underground VIP parking garage. The descent was quiet, giving me a moment to process the sheer audacity of their strategy. Lauren family was entirely comfortable weaponizing the justice system to crush anyone who threatened their socioeconomic dominance. The elevator doors opened to the dimly lit expanse of the underground garage. The air was cool and smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. My armored black SUV sat in its designated spot near the exit ramp. As I walked toward my vehicle, the sharp echo of my heels was suddenly joined by the scuffing of rubber soles against concrete. I stopped. Two figures stepped out from the shadow of a concrete pillar blocking my path to the driver's side door, Vivian and Desmond. They had not left the premises. When security escorted them out the front doors, they must have slipped down the delivery ramp to ambush me away from the lobby cameras. Morgan, Vivian said, her voice dropping its shrill, aggressive tone from earlier. She took a step forward, holding her hands up in a placating gesture. Please just listen to us. We saw Lauren storming out. We know what her father is capable of doing to you. We stayed because we want to protect you. I crossed my arms, gripping the manila envelope. Protect me. You sneaked into a secure parking garage to protect me. Vivian sighed, shaking her head with a look of maternal disappointment. You have always been so difficult, Morgan. So stubborn and prone to dramatic misunderstandings. You think we hate you, but you twist everything in your head. That Christmas on the porch. I was trying to save you from humiliation. You smelled like garbage. Lauren parents would have judged you mercilessly. I put you outside to spare your feelings. I was protecting your dignity. And now you are punishing your brother because of your own twisted insecurities. The sheer velocity of her gaslighting was breathtaking. She was attempting to rewrite history, turning her absolute cruelty into an act of maternal sacrifice. "See what you made Lauren do," Vivian said. "Her family will tear you to pieces. You are a black woman with a startup. They are an institution. But we can fix this. Just transfer the $5 million to Trey right now. If you do that, I will personally talk to Lauren. I will smooth things over. Give up the money and we will welcome you back into the family. I am giving you a lifeline, Morgan. Take it before you drown." I stared at her, the utter delusion radiating from her perfectly manicured presence. "You are not offering a lifeline, Vivian. You are holding a gun to my head and calling it a rescue." Desmond stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on Vivian's shoulder. He straightened his pastoral collar, his face set in an expression of righteous sorrow. "Do not speak to your mother that way, Morgan. She is trying to save your soul. The Lord commands us to honor our father and mother. He blesses us with wealth so we can lift up our family in times of trouble." He pointed a finger at me. "You have allowed greed to harden your heart. Your brother is facing the destruction of his life. $5 million is a small price to pay for your salvation. It is your tithe to this family. If you allow the secular courts to destroy Trey, his blood will be on your hands. The church will know of your wickedness. Pride comes before the fall, Morgan, and you are standing on the edge of a very high cliff." I looked at the man who used God as a collection plate and morality as a weapon. "You are not worried about my soul, Desmond. You are terrified of the scandal. If Trey goes to federal prison for embezzlement, your megachurch donors will stop writing checks. Your real estate investments will dry up. You are protecting your own wallet, not your son." I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was inches from my father. "And Vivian," I said, turning my gaze to her, "do not ever pretend you know how the world works, just because you successfully married into a pulpit. I built my company from nothing. I designed a system that the biggest banks rely on. You think I am intimidated by Lauren father? By old money? Let them try to freeze my accounts. Let them file injunctions. I have contingency plans they cannot even comprehend." I walked past them, bumping Desmond's shoulder hard enough to make him stumble. The bright headlights flashed, illuminating their shocked faces in the dim concrete light. I climbed into the leather driver's seat and started the powerful engine. "You have zero leverage left," I said, rolling up the window. I sped away, leaving them both standing behind in the cold, dark, exhaust-filled garage. The drive to the secure off-site server facility took 20 minutes. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel as I navigated the morning Atlanta traffic. The adrenaline from the parking garage encounter was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating precision. My phone sat in the cup holder, silent for now, but I knew the storm was brewing. I pulled into the unmarked industrial park where Aegis housed its most sensitive hardware. The building looked like an abandoned warehouse from the outside, but inside it was a fortress of biometric scanners and armed guards. I parked and stepped into the stark white lobby. My lead counsel, David, was already waiting by the security desk. He held a tablet, his expression grim. "They moved faster than we anticipated, Morgan," he said, falling into step beside me. "Davis and Sterling just filed an ex parte motion. They convinced a friendly judge to freeze your personal accounts, pending the intellectual property review." I nodded, swiping my badge at the turnstile. "I expected that. Let them have the personal accounts for now. Our corporate operating funds are completely insulated. We need to lock down the source code logs immediately." Before I could walk through the security gates, the heavy steel doors behind us opened. I turned around. Lauren marched into the facility lobby, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished concrete. But she was not alone this time. My younger sister Kelsey trailed right behind her, wearing designer sunglasses indoors and holding her phone out as if she were live streaming the entire encounter. A man in a cheap suit flanked them, clutching a stack of legal documents. Lauren had tracked me down. "You have been served, Morgan," Lauren announced, her voice ringing through the cavernous lobby. The man in the suit stepped forward and thrust the paperwork against my chest. I let the papers fall to the floor. "You tracked my vehicle, Lauren?" I asked, keeping my tone dangerously calm. "That is a bold move." "I do not need to track you," Lauren sneered, crossing her arms. I have resources you cannot even imagine. You really thought you could drive from my family. Your personal accounts are frozen. Your credit cards will decline. You have nothing. Kelsey lowered her phone slightly, a nasty smirk playing on her lips. You should have just given Trey the money, Morgan. Now you are going to lose your whole fake company. Mom is already telling everyone at church that you lost your mind. I looked at my younger sister. Kelsey was 28, an aspiring social media influencer whose entire lifestyle was funded by our parents' stolen wealth. It is funny you mention fake companies, Kelsey, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the lobby. David and the security guards watched in silence. Do your followers know how you paid for that engagement party last month? Do they know how you paid for your custom wedding dress 3 years ago? Kelsey's smirk faltered. Shut up, Morgan. No, let us be completely transparent since you brought a camera. I stepped closer, forcing her to take a step back. 3 years ago, Vivian forged my signature on my car title. She sold my only mode of transportation to a shady dealership for $8,000 cash. And she used every single penny of that money to buy your designer wedding dress. You walked down the aisle wrapped in stolen property. Kelsey's face turned a mottled shade of red. Lauren glanced at her, looking suddenly uncomfortable. You are lying, Kelsey stammered. Mom said she bought that dress from her savings. I smiled, pulling my phone from my pocket. I have the dealership receipt and the forged title transfer saved in my secure drive. I also have the bank routing numbers showing where the funds went. If Lauren's father is so good at federal law, maybe he can explain the penalties for grand theft auto and wire fraud. Because the statute of limitations has not expired, and I am more than happy to file a police report right now. Kelsey lowered her phone completely, her influencer facade crumbling into genuine panic. You would not do that. You would ruin my wedding. You ruined my life 3 years ago, I shot back. You left me stranded with nothing while you paraded around in a stolen gown. You and Trey are exactly the same. Parasites feeding off whatever you can steal. Lauren stepped in front of Kelsey, her white privilege flaring up like a shield. Do not threaten us, Morgan. This lawsuit is just the beginning. We will tear your life apart piece by piece until you surrender Aegis to my husband. You are just an angry, bitter woman playing dress-up in a corporate world you do not belong in. I looked at the legal documents scattered on the floor. I am not angry, Lauren. I am executing a tactical response. And you just made the biggest mistake of your life by stepping into my facility. I turned to my lead counsel. David, add trespassing and corporate harassment to our countersuit. And contact the Atlanta Police Department. I want to report a stolen vehicle from 3 years ago. Name Vivian and Kelsey as the primary suspects. Lauren's eyes widened. You are bluffing. I stepped through the security turnstile, the glass barriers sliding shut between us. Watch me, I said. My security guards moved forward, forcing Lauren and Kelsey back toward the exit. I watched them stumble backward toward the glass doors. Lauren tried to maintain her haughty composure, but her hands shook as she grabbed Kelsey's arm. The entitled heiress was finally facing a wall she could not buy or bully her way through. Kelsey was practically in tears, mourning her pristine reputation. The heavy doors closed behind them, leaving the lobby completely silent again. I picked up my phone and opened my encrypted network dashboard, ready to legally initiate the next devastating phase of my operation against their corrupt family. David followed me through the heavy biometric doors into the subterranean server farm. The hum of industrial cooling units masked the chaotic adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The air down here was frigid by design, a physical reminder that I was now operating entirely on logic. I walked over to the primary terminal and placed my hand on the glass scanner. A soft green light validated my identity, granting me access to the central nervous system of Aegis Forensics. I turned to my lead counsel, who was already pulling up the court filings on his tablet. The screen illuminated his sharp features, casting deep shadows across his face. They did not waste a single second, David muttered, shaking his head as he scrolled through the injunction documents. Davis and Sterling went straight to Judge Carmichael. He owes Lauren's father a massive favor from that commercial zoning dispute 3 years ago. The temporary restraining order is active right now, Morgan. They have officially frozen every personal bank account attached to your social security number, checking savings, your investment portfolios, even your primary mortgage escrow. If it has your name on it, you cannot touch a single dime. I kept my eyes on my terminal, typing in my encryption keys. Let them freeze it, I said, my voice completely steady. Lauren thinks she is fighting a desperate college dropout. She believes cutting off my debit cards will send me crawling back to Vivian and Desmond begging for mercy. She is relying on the classic old money playbook: starve the opponent until they surrender without a fight. But she fundamentally misunderstands how wealth actually works in the digital age. David looked up from his tablet, frowning slightly. Morgan, you have zero liquid personal assets right now. You cannot buy a cup of coffee. You cannot pay your personal utility bills or buy gas. They are trying to create a massive panic response. They want you to make a stupid emotional mistake. I smiled, tapping the final command into the terminal. My personal accounts hold less than 10% of my actual net worth, David. When Vivian kicked me out, I learned a very valuable lesson about financial vulnerability. I never put all my resources in a place where one angry person with influence could take them away. Aegis Forensics is a corporate entity registered across 3 different holding companies. My personal wealth is insulated behind decentralized trusts that Davis and Sterling cannot even find, let alone freeze. They just wasted their biggest bullet hitting a deliberate decoy target. The terminal screen flashed green, confirming the total lockdown of our source code logs. I pulled up the financial structure of Lauren family firm. This was the pure arrogance of white privilege and generational wealth. Lauren assumed the law was a weapon only she knew how to wield properly. She believed her father's name on a brass plaque gave her total immunity from consequence. She thought freezing my checking account was a definitive checkmate. It was barely a pawn moving on the global board. I stepped away from the terminal and walked toward the glass-enclosed briefing room at the far end of the server floor. My core tactical team was already assembling inside. These were the best forensic data analysts in the country, hackers who had turned their unique skills into highly lucrative corporate careers. I paid them exorbitant salaries specifically for moments exactly like this one. I walked into the room and the low murmur of conversation instantly died. Listen carefully, I said, resting my hands on the head of the briefing table. Davis and Sterling just launched a hostile legal strike against my personal assets. They are attempting to blackmail me into covering up a $15 million deficit for my brother investment fund. They are alleging intellectual property theft to justify their aggressive injunction. We are going to bury them in their own staggering arrogance. I need a full forensic sweep of every financial transaction running through Lauren family real estate firm and Trey investment portfolio. My lead data architect, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah, brought up a holographic projection of the banking nodes. We are already mapping their offshore routing, Morgan, she said confidently. If Trey is missing $15 million, it did not just vanish into thin air. He moved it actively. And Davis and Sterling has a long history of burying bad debt in shell companies tied to their commercial developments. Exactly, I nodded, my eyes scanning the flowing digital data. Lauren thinks freezing my personal accounts puts me on the defensive. But by filing that injunction, she just kicked open the door for mutual legal discovery. If they want to examine my algorithms, we get to meticulously examine their ledgers. I want every deleted email, every doctored spreadsheet, every hidden offshore transfer. We are going to map the entire anatomy of their massive fraud. I want the undeniable proof ready for the federal authorities by the end of the week. The team immediately went to work, their fingers flying across glowing keyboards. The air in the room crackled with an intense, focused energy. This was my undisputed domain. I was not a victim shivering on a porch anymore. I was an apex predator orchestrating a flawless trap. I left the briefing room and headed back up to my executive office. As I walked out of the elevator, my phone vibrated rapidly in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a text message from a blocked number. I knew exactly who it was. The message was brief and dripping with gloating satisfaction. Your cards will decline today. Your mortgage will default next week. You have nothing, Morgan. Sign the company over to Trey by Friday, or you will be living on the street. Mom and Dad are praying for your cooperation right now. Lauren. I read the text twice, letting the sheer delusion of her words fuel my resolve. I smiled, closing my phone. I woke my secondary monitor. It was time to see how my family handled their perceived victory. I navigated to Vivian Public social media profile. The page was a masterclass in curated elite Atlanta society life. At the top was a photo posted 20 minutes ago. My entire family gathered around a brunch table at the Buckhead Club. The caption was nauseatingly predictable. God protects his faithful servants. Celebrating a massive legal victory for our family business today, the truth prevails against those tearing down our legacy. They actually believed they won. Trey looked relaxed. Lauren wore a smug grin. They drank champagne paid for by stolen funds. Every public post establishing their confidence would make the eventual crash more devastating. My phone chimed. The caller identification displayed a number I had not dialed in 3 years. It was Kelsey. My sister rarely reached out unless she needed funding. Today she was calling the sister she ambushed. I pressed button, activating the recording software that monitored calls to my executive line. The system chirped, signaling the recording commenced. I answered, "Hello, Kelsey." "Morgan, thank God you answered," Kelsey said, her voice artificially sweet. "Listen, I am calling you from the restroom at the country club. Mom and Dad and Trey are out there celebrating, but I told them I needed to fix my makeup. I wanted to talk to you privately before things get completely out of hand." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes locked on the frozen image of her smiling face on my monitor. "You want to talk privately after bringing a camera to my lobby to humiliate me. That is an interesting strategy, Kelsey." She sighed, a heavy, dramatic sound meant to convey deep sisterly concern. "You have to understand, Morgan. Lauren dragged me there. She told Mom she needed a witness and Mom made me go. You know I cannot say no to them, but I am looking out for you right now. I just saw the legal papers Lauren father filed. They are going to completely ruin you. They are going to take Aegis Forensics and leave you with massive legal debts. You will be bankrupt by the end of the month." I let a few seconds of silence stretch across the line, allowing her to fill the void. She took the bait immediately. "But I can stop them!" Kelsey rushed on, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "I have a lot of influence over Trey right now. Lauren is obsessed with keeping my wedding on the society pages because her family firm is sponsoring the venue. I can talk them down. I can convince Lauren to drop the intellectual property lawsuit and unfreeze your personal accounts. I can make this whole nightmare go away today." "And what is the exact price for this miraculous intervention?" I asked, tapping my pen against the mahogany desk. "Because I know you are not offering to save my company out of the absolute goodness of your heart." Kelsey let out a nervous little laugh. "It is not a price, Morgan. It is a mutually beneficial family arrangement. My wedding budget has spiraled completely out of control. Mom promised to cover the floral arrangements and the catering, but Dad real estate investments are tied up right now and they are stalling. The wedding planner is threatening to cancel the entire event if we do not provide a massive cash infusion by tomorrow morning. I need $200,000 wired directly to my wedding planner escrow account." I stopped tapping the pen. "You are demanding $200,000 to call off a fraudulent lawsuit. Do not use ugly words like demanding." Kelsey huffed, her tone sharpening. "I am offering you a lifeline. $200,000 is nothing to a chief executive. It is pocket change for you. But if you refuse, Lauren father will litigate you into the ground, and you will lose a company worth tens of millions. Think about it, Morgan. $200,000 is a very cheap insurance policy to keep your empire intact. You wire the money today, and I will make sure Trey tells Lauren to withdraw the injunction before the banks close. You are blackmailing your own sister to fund a party," I stated clearly, ensuring the recording captured the exact nature of the transaction. "I am giving you a business proposition," Kelsey snapped, dropping the sweet facade completely. "You always thought you were smarter than all of us. But right now, you are cornered. Your debit cards do not work. Your mortgage is frozen. You cannot even buy groceries. You wire that money to my planner, or I walk back out to that brunch table and I tell Lauren to accelerate the asset seizure. I will watch them destroy you, and I will not lose a single second of sleep over it." I looked at the glowing red recording icon on my screen. The trap had clamped shut perfectly. Kelsey had just committed federal extortion on a recorded line crossing state communication networks. Send me the routing information for the escrow account, I said, keeping my voice quiet to simulate defeat. Kelsey let out a sharp squeal of triumph. I knew you would finally see reason, Morgan. I will text you the banking details right now. You just saved yourself a lot of misery. See, we can still help each other like real sisters. She disconnected the call. I placed the receiver back on the cradle. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a text message containing the wedding planner routing numbers. I highlighted the message, extracted the audio file from my secure console, and forwarded both directly to my legal team. The old money elites thought they were playing chess, but they had just handed me definitive proof of a criminal conspiracy. The celebration at the country club was about to become the most expensive brunch of their entire lives. I left my executive office and took the private elevator back down to the subterranean server floor. The adrenaline from Kelsey's extortion call had crystallized into pure, absolute focus. I entered the glass-enclosed briefing room. My team of forensic data analysts had not moved from their terminals. The holographic displays mapping the financial networks of Davis and Sterling were flashing red, indicating massive structural vulnerabilities. Sarah, my lead data architect, looked up. Her eyes gleamed with the thrill of the hunt. "You were right, Morgan," she said, pulling up a screen. Lauren Father opened the door to mutual legal discovery when he filed that aggressive injunction. His filing required providing his own metadata to establish legal standing. We legally drove a massive truck through that digital loophole today. "Show me exactly what you found," I commanded. Sarah tapped her keyboard and the red nodes expanded. Trey's $15 million deficit is completely fabricated, she explained. He did not lose the money through bad trades on the open market. He funneled it into offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Trey is not smart enough to build this complex architecture. He had professional help. I tracked the digital lines flowing directly into the corporate accounts of Davis and Sterling. Lauren family firm, I stated, watching the pieces fall into place. They used my brother as a willing puppet. Exactly. Sarah nodded, typing rapidly. Davis and Sterling is drowning in toxic real estate debt. They artificially inflated their asset valuations for the past decade to secure federal loans. When the market shifted, those loans became toxic. They needed capital to cover margins, so they used Lauren Marriage to access his fund. They drained his investor capital to pay their corporate debts. Trey embezzled $15 million to save his wealthy in-laws from bankruptcy. The sheer scale of the betrayal was staggering. Lauren Old Money family had looked down on my parents for years. Meanwhile, they were draining my brother fund, setting him up for federal wire fraud. My parents were so blinded by proximity to white wealth, they handed their golden child over to be slaughtered. We have the raw transaction logs, Sarah continued, highlighting flashing yellow icons. To hide the transfer, Davis and Sterling collateralized their prime real estate holdings. They bundled their debt and sold it to secondary distress funds. They are floating on a house of cards. If those secondary debt notes are called and the Davis and Sterling empire collapses. I stared at the financial web, my mind operating at maximum strategic velocity. Lauren had threatened to destroy my company. She mocked my background and weaponized her legal privilege to freeze my personal accounts. She thought she was untouchable because her family name commanded Atlanta. She did not realize she had just handed me the keys to her entire kingdom. Can we trace the holding companies that currently own the Davis and Sterling debt? I asked. Sarah typed rapidly. Yes, the debt was sold to 3 anonymous hedge funds in Delaware. They bought the toxic loans for pennies on the dollar. I straightened my posture, pulling my secure device from my pocket. Access the Aegis corporate reserve accounts, I instructed. I want you to deploy $75 million in liquid capital immediately. Sarah paused, looking up at me in surprise. You want to buy the toxic debt? I do not just want to buy it, I said. I want to initiate a complete hostile takeover of Davis and Sterling. My team stared at me. I was authorizing the deployment of my corporate war chest to consume the very institution trying to sue me out of existence. Route the capital through our blind trusts, I continued. Purchase every single debt note tied to the Davis and Sterling commercial portfolio. Buy out the Delaware hedge funds completely. Pay them a premium if you have to, just get it done before the markets close today. I want Aegis Forensics to be the sole creditor for Lauren family legacy. Sarah nodded. We can execute the acquisitions through decentralized purchasing algorithms. They will not know who is buying the debt until the transfers clear. It will take approximately 4 hours to secure majority control. Do it, I commanded. And while securing the real estate debt map, the collateral tied to Trey personal guarantees. If he funneled $15 million to his in-laws, he secured that deficit against personal assets to keep auditors quiet. Another analyst named Marcus brought up a window. You are right, Morgan. Trey leveraged everything he had to cover the initial transfers. His stock portfolios, his retirement accounts, and the primary deed to a massive residential property in Buckhead. I looked at the address flashing on the screen. It was not Trey House. It was a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive gated community in Atlanta. The property belonged to Vivian and Desmond. My parents put up their mega church-funded mansion as collateral to secure fraudulent loans for their golden child. They bet their lavish lifestyle on Trey's success and Lauren family prestige. Buy that deed too, I said, feeling poetic justice wrap around me. Purchase the debt on my parents' estate, included in the hostile takeover package immediately. By midnight tonight, I want to own the roof over their heads. The team sprang into action, the room filling with the rapid clatter of keystrokes as millions began moving through the digital ether. I stood before the terminal watching the hostile takeover execute in real time. The elites in my family spent the morning celebrating their perceived victory. They were drinking mimosas and laughing about my frozen debit cards. They had no idea a relentless digital army was currently purchasing their entire reality. I turned and walked out of the briefing room ready to face the storm. Lauren thought her lawsuit would break my spirit. She was dead wrong. Instead of surrendering, I decided to buy the battleground and redefine the rules entirely. I stepped into the private elevator, the polished steel doors sliding shut to seal away the hum of the server floor. My phone vibrated in my palm. It was not an alert from my data team. It was a notification from a social media monitoring algorithm I had set up years ago to track public mentions of my name alongside my family. I opened the application. Vivian had gone nuclear. She had posted a sprawling multi-paragraph essay on her public profile. It was accompanied by a carefully selected photograph from 8 years ago. In the picture, Vivian and I were smiling in front of her megachurch. I looked young and naive. She looked perfectly maternal. The caption was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. My heart is completely broken today, she wrote. A mother love is unconditional, but sometimes we must surrender our children to the Lord when they lose their way. My youngest daughter Morgan has suffered a severe mental break. We tried everything to help her. We offered her grace and financial support, but the corporate world has corrupted her spirit. She has stolen from her own brother. She has threatened her sister. Now she is attempting to ruin our family ministry out of pure spite and greed. Please pray for my family during this dark season. We are trusting God to heal her deeply troubled mind. The post was a calculated assassination. Vivian knew exactly what she was doing. By framing my success as a mental breakdown and my defensive actions as unprovoked theft, she completely invalidated my position. She cast herself as the grieving, righteous matriarch. The post already had 4,000 likes and hundreds of comments. The elite circles of Atlanta were devouring the drama. The fallout was instantaneous. By the time the elevator reached my penthouse apartment, my phone was a relentless stream of cancellations and inquiries. The pushback from Atlanta high society moved with vicious speed. These were people who attended Vivian extravagant charity galas and listened to Desmond preach every Sunday. They were fiercely loyal to the illusion of the flawless megachurch family. My assistant messaged me frantic. The country club where I occasionally hosted corporate clients abruptly revoked my membership, citing a violation of their morality clause. The organizers of the upcoming Women in Technology Summit emailed to inform me that my keynote speech was canceled due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts. Even a local philanthropic board I had generously funded sent a cold message asking me to step down immediately. Vivian had successfully weaponized her social capital to isolate me. In the affluent circles of Atlanta, reputation was absolute currency. My mother had just declared me bankrupt. I walked into my penthouse, dropping my keys onto the glass entryway table. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the skyline, but I barely noticed. I poured a glass of sparkling water and watched the notifications continue to flood my screen. Members of Desmond congregation were posting aggressive messages on my business profile. They called me a Jezebel, a thief, a disgrace to the community. They promised to boycott Aegis Forensics. It was a coordinated digital lynching designed to force me into a panicked surrender. Lauren had clearly orchestrated this public relations strike alongside Vivian. They wanted me ostracized. They wanted me to feel the crushing weight of public rejection, hoping I would beg for their forgiveness to restore my social standing. They forgot that I survived being invisible for 3 years. Public rejection meant nothing to a woman who built her empire in the dark. The heavy knock at my front door broke the quiet of my apartment. My building had elite security, but process servers possessed a unique ability to bypass standard barriers. I set down my glass and walked to the entrance. Opening the thick mahogany door, I found a man in a rumpled suit standing in the hallway. He held a thick stack of legal documents. "Morgan Brooks," he asked, confirming my identity. "I am Morgan Brooks," I replied, my voice perfectly even. "You have been served," he stated, pressing the heavy stack of papers into my hands before turning quickly and walking back toward the elevators. I closed the door and carried the documents to my kitchen island. The seal of the federal court glared back at me. This was the official summons. Lauren Father had executed his threat with ruthless efficiency. The documents outlined a mandatory mediation hearing scheduled for 48 hours from now. It was a preliminary injunction hearing to formally strip me of my executive power and enforce the total freeze of Aegis Forensics assets. They alleged corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and malicious intellectual property theft. The paperwork was incredibly thorough, packed with falsified timelines and manipulated technical jargon designed to confuse a judge who did not understand complex code. It was a terrifying display of legal firepower. A normal person would have crumbled under the sheer weight of this intimidation. I placed the federal summons neatly next to my laptop. My phone buzzed one final time. It was an encrypted message from Sarah, my lead data architect. The hostile takeover was complete. Aegis Forensics now officially owned every single secondary debt note tied to Davis and Sterling. We also held the primary deed to my parents' sprawling estate. The trap was fully loaded and the spring was set. My family and their wealthy in-laws believed they had pushed me to the absolute edge of a cliff. They were preparing to watch me fall at the mediation hearing. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. I packed the federal summons into my leather briefcase. They wanted a legal battle in front of a federal mediator. I was going to give them an absolute massacre. The destruction of their fake empire was rapidly approaching now. Let the elite society talk. Their harsh judgment meant absolutely nothing to me now. 48 hours later, I stood in the heavy oak-paneled corridor outside Mediation Room 4 at the federal courthouse. The air conditioning was aggressive, chilling the sweat on the palms of the few anxious plaintiffs waiting nearby. I felt no anxiety. My lead counsel David stood beside me, running a critical eye over our physical evidence binders. We were not bringing digital tablets into this room. I wanted Lauren Father to feel the physical weight of the paper that was about to bury him. David adjusted his glasses, his expression perfectly neutral. "We are ready, Morgan," he stated softly. "The trap is completely airtight." The heavy wooden door swung open, and the bailiff signaled for us to enter. The mediation was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, dark wood, and a massive polished mahogany table dominated the space. The federal mediator, Judge Harrison, sat at the head of the table reviewing a thick file. He was known for his absolute intolerance of corporate nonsense and his severe demeanor. I took my seat on the right side of the table, David sitting to my immediate left. We arranged our 3 thick binders in front of us. 5 minutes passed in absolute silence, and then the door opened again. The arrival of my family and their legal team was a choreographed display of supreme arrogance. Lauren Father Richard Davis led the procession. He was a tall, imposing white man with a head of thick silver hair and a custom suit that probably cost more than my first car. He carried himself with the absolute certainty of a man who owned the building. Lauren walked right behind him, her chin held high, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon. Trey followed closely, his previous panic completely erased by the presence of his powerful father-in-law. My brother actually smirked when he saw me sitting. Then came Vivian and Desmond. They had no legal standing in this specific corporate dispute, but Richard Davis had clearly brought them along for psychological warfare. Vivian wore a severe black dress projecting the image of a grieving mother forced to witness her daughter's ultimate failure. Desmond carried his leather-bound Bible, resting it prominently on the table as he took his seat. They arranged themselves opposite me, a unified front of wealth, privilege, and righteous indignation. Richard Davis did not even acknowledge my presence. He greeted Judge Harrison with the familiar warmth of a peer, a subtle reminder of his influence in this courthouse. "Good morning, Your Honor," Richard boomed, setting his single slim file folder on the table. "I apologize for the necessity of this emergency hearing, but we are dealing with a blatant case of intellectual property theft that threatens the stability of a major investment fund. We are here to secure the immediate surrender of Aegis Forensics and the permanent removal of Morgan Brooks from her fraudulent executive position." Judge Harrison peered over his glasses, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Davis, these are severe allegations. The plaintiff is claiming that the core predictive algorithm of Aegis Forensics was stolen from Davis and Sterling servers 3 years ago." "That is correct, Your Honor," Lauren interjected, her voice ringing with practiced confidence. "Morgan Brooks was employed as a nighttime janitor at our corporate headquarters. She used her unrestricted access to breach our secure servers. She stole proprietary code that my father firm spent millions developing. She then used our stolen property to build a company and is now attempting to extort my husband's investment fund." Trey nodded solemnly, leaning forward. "She threatened to release sensitive financial data if I did not pay her $5 million, Your Honor. My sister is unstable and deeply vindictive. We have witness testimony regarding her erratic behavior." Vivian dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. "We tried to help her, Your Honor," she sniffled. "We offered her grace, but she has turned her back on her family and her faith. She is a deeply troubled young woman." I sat in silence, letting their lies fill the room. The sheer volume of their perjury was staggering. They were painting a masterpiece of deception, relying entirely on my background as a college dropout and a former janitor to validate their story. They assumed a federal judge would naturally believe a wealthy real estate tycoon and a respectable pastor over a black woman who used to scrub floors. Judge Harrison turned his gaze to me. "Ms. Brooks, you are facing significant federal charges. Your personal accounts have been frozen to prevent capital flight. What is your response to these allegations of corporate espionage and extortion?" I remained seated, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Your Honor, I am not a thief and I did not extort my brother. The allegations presented by Davis and Sterling are entirely fabricated to mask a massive criminal conspiracy." Richard Davis let out a loud, condescending laugh. "A criminal conspiracy? Your Honor, this is exactly the kind of paranoid delusion we warned you about. This woman is desperate and lashing out." "I ask that the plaintiff refrain from interrupting me," I said, locking eyes with Richard. I turned back to the judge. 3 years ago, I did work as a janitor at Davis and Sterling. I worked there because my parents, standing in this room, cut off my tuition and emptied my bank accounts. But I did not steal anything from their servers. The algorithm that powers Aegis Forensics is my original creation. It is patented, trademarked, and thoroughly documented with time-stamped source code logs." Lauren scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Anyone can fake a timestamp. You stole the foundation of the code." I ignored her, completely focusing on the judge. "My algorithm is designed to track complex financial anomalies and predict catastrophic debt failure. It is highly effective. So effective, in fact, that when Davis and Sterling approached my firm for an emergency audit 2 days ago, I ran a preliminary diagnostic on their public filings and the filings of my brother investment fund." Trey shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the smirk finally slipping from his face. I placed my hand on the first binder. "What I found, Your Honor, was not an intellectual property dispute. I found the exact reason why Davis and Sterling manufactured this lawsuit to forcefully take control of my company. They do not want my code because I stole it. They want my code because it caught them stealing $15 million. Richard Davis slammed his fist against the mahogany table. The sudden sharp sound echoed like a gunshot through the mediation room. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face a mask of absolute outrage. Your Honor, I object to this blatant defamation. This woman is attempting to hijack a hearing about her own intellectual property theft by slinging baseless accusations at a highly respected investment fund. I demand she be sanctioned. Judge Harrison did not look at Richard. He kept his eyes fixed entirely on me, his expression hardening into intense judicial scrutiny. The federal mediator leaned forward, folding his hands together. Ms. Brooks, he stated, his voice carrying absolute authority, you have just accused the plaintiffs of a massive federal crime in my mediation room. You better have the documentation to support that claim, or I will personally see to it that you are held in contempt of court before noon. I did not flinch under his gaze. I simply nodded to my lead counsel. David slid the first thick binder across the polished table, stopping it exactly in front of the judge. We welcome your review, Your Honor, David said smoothly. That binder contains the raw, unedited transaction logs pulled directly from the public metadata of Trey Brooks Investment Fund and the corporate filings of Davis and Sterling. My client predictive algorithm did not steal anything. It merely followed the digital footprints that the plaintiffs carelessly left behind. Judge Harrison opened the binder. The room went dead silent, save for the rustle of heavy paper turning. My forensic team mapped the entire architecture of Trey missing $15 million, I continued. He did not lose that capital through poor market trades. He willfully funneled it through a series of offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. He deliberately drained investor capital to funnel cash into Davis and Sterling. Richard Davis scoffed a harsh, dismissive sound. We have legitimate offshore holdings for tax purposes. That proves absolutely nothing about theft. You are grasping at straws to save your fake company. I smiled, a cold, calculated expression that finally made Richard hesitate. Turn to Section 4, Your Honor, I instructed. You will see exactly why Davis and Sterling needed that $15 million so desperately. Judge Harrison flipped the heavy pages. His eyes darted rapidly across the printed spreadsheets and forensic flowcharts. Davis and Sterling has been drowning in toxic real estate debt for the past decade, I explained. They artificially inflated their commercial asset valuations to secure massive federal loans. When the commercial real estate market shifted, those loans became toxic. They were facing imminent margin calls. To avoid total bankruptcy, they used Lauren Marriage to access my brother investment fund. Trey embezzled $15 million to pay their corporate debts, effectively becoming a willing puppet to save his wealthy white in-laws. Vivian let out a loud gasp, clutching her chest. Trey would never do such a thing. You are lying, Morgan. You are trying to destroy your brother. Desmond glared at me with righteous fury. The Lord sees your wicked lies. I ignored my parents entirely, focusing solely on the judge, whose face had grown pale as he read the documentation. But embezzling $15 million to cover bad real estate debt is only the beginning of their problem, Your Honor, I stated clearly. David pushed the next heavy stack of evidence toward the federal mediator. Judge Harrison opened the second binder, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He read the first page and stopped completely. He looked up at Richard Davis and then back down at the paper. What exactly am I looking at here, Ms. Brooks? He asked, his voice suddenly deadly serious. You are looking at the true source of the capital that Davis and Sterling used to prop up their failing empire, I answered. My algorithm traced the offshore shell companies linked to Trey Fund. Those accounts do not just hold embezzled investor money. They are directly tied to an internationally sanctioned criminal syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe. The room erupted. Richard Davis jumped out of his chair, his face draining of all blood. That is an outrageous lie. Lauren grabbed her father's arm, her designer facade crumbling into pure panic. Trey looked physically ill, leaning over the table as if he might vomit. My parents stared at Trey, their perfect golden child, suddenly exposed as a criminal pawn. They were not just covering bad loans, Your Honor. I continued, speaking loudly over their chaotic protests. Davis and Sterling used Trey Investment Fund as a massive industrial washing machine. They laundered cartel money through his accounts, mixing it with the stolen investor capital to cover their tracks. Lauren Family Firm has been actively cleaning dirty money for an international organized crime syndicate. They filed this lawsuit against me because my software flagged their transactions. They needed to seize Aegis Forensics to destroy the evidence before federal authorities noticed the anomalies. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down, silencing the room instantly. "Everyone sit down and remain completely quiet," he roared. The sheer authority in his voice forced Richard back into his chair. Judge Harrison picked up the documents, his hands gripping the paper tightly. He looked at the forensic routing numbers, the offshore account matches, and the international banking codes. The evidence was irrefutable. It was pristine mathematical truth. "This is not an intellectual property dispute," he stated, his voice echoing in the vast room. "This is international money laundering and federal wire fraud." He looked directly at Richard Davis. "You brought a fraudulent lawsuit into my court to cover up a criminal enterprise. You used the justice system as a shield for a syndicate." Richard Davis opened his mouth, but he had absolutely no defense. The undeniable proof was sitting right in front of him. The trap had snapped shut, breaking their entire legacy into tiny, irreparable pieces. "I watched their arrogant empire completely crumble before my eyes today." Richard Davis scrambled to his feet, his chair tipping backward and crashing against the hardwood floor. The loud thud broke the paralysis gripping his side of the table. "Your Honor," he stammered, his booming confidence reduced to a desperate wheeze. "We withdraw the complaint. We withdraw the motion for injunction immediately. We ask that this entire mediation proceeding be stricken from the record and sealed to protect the privacy of the individuals involved." Judge Harrison glared at the wealthy patriarch. "You cannot simply unring a bell of this magnitude, Mr. Davis. You brought evidence of federal money laundering into my mediation room. As an officer of the court, I have a strict legal obligation to forward these binders directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission. You may formally withdraw your intellectual property lawsuit against Ms. Brooks, but this matter is entirely out of your hands now." Lauren lunged at her husband. She grabbed the lapels of Trey's custom suit, her manicured fingers digging into the expensive fabric. "You ruined us!" Lauren shrieked, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "You stupid, incompetent fool! You promised my father you knew how to cover your tracks. You promised the offshore accounts were untraceable. Now I am going to lose my trust fund, and my father is going to prison, because you could not even hide a simple digital transfer." Trey violently shoved Lauren away. She stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the heavy table. "Do not put this on me, Lauren," he yelled, his face contorted with pure panic. "Your father forced me to do it. He threatened to ruin my investment fund if I did not help clean that syndicate money. You used me. Your entire family used me as a disposable shield because you were too cowardly to wash your own dirty cash. I am not going down for your father real estate fraud. I will testify against both of you to secure federal immunity." Richard Davis lunged toward my brother, but the bailiff immediately stepped between them, placing a heavy hand on Richard's chest. "Stay back," the bailiff commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Desmond slammed his leather-bound Bible onto the table. The sharp sound made everyone flinch. He turned his righteous fury entirely on his golden child. "You foolish, wicked boy!" Desmond roared, spit flying from his lips. "You brought international criminals into our lives. You tied our holy ministry to a money-laundering syndicate. When the congregation finds out about this, the church will collapse. The board of deacons will strip me of my pastoral title by nightfall. You have destroyed my entire legacy, Trey." Vivian rushed forward, stepping between her husband and her son. She raised her hand and delivered a stinging slap directly across Lauren's face. The sharp crack silenced the room for a split second. "How dare you blame my son?" Vivian screamed at her wealthy white daughter-in-law. "How dare your corrupt father use my brilliant boy as a scapegoat for your criminal enterprise? We trusted you. We welcomed you into our elite social circle. You are nothing but common thugs dressed in designer clothes." Lauren pressed a hand to her reddened cheek, her eyes blazing with absolute hatred. "Elite social circle." Lauren laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You are a delusional housewife, Vivian. My family only associated with you to access your son banking network. We despised your tacky church events and your desperate need for validation. You are not elite. You are just useful idiots who gladly sold your own souls for an invitation to the country club. The implosion was spectacular. The flawless, wealthy facade they had maintained for years had completely shattered, revealing the rotting foundation beneath. They were tearing each other to pieces like starving animals fighting over a carcass. I sat quietly watching the absolute destruction of their toxic empire. David, my lead counsel, calmly packed our evidence binders back into his leather briefcase. The federal mediator watched the chaotic scene with profound disgust before signaling the bailiff to clear the room. Before anyone could be escorted out, I stood up. I reached into my slim portfolio and pulled out a single piece of paper. The heavy legal stock felt crisp between my fingers. I walked slowly around the mahogany table, approaching Vivian and Desmond. They stopped yelling at Lauren and turned to look at me. Their faces were flushed with rage and terror. Morgan, Vivian pleaded, her voice dropping back into that manipulative, maternal tone. You have to help us. You have the money now. You can hire the best defense attorneys in Atlanta for your brother. We can still fix this family. I held out the piece of paper. Desmond reached forward and took it, his hands shaking violently. He read the top line and the last remaining drop of color drained from his face. He staggered backward, clutching the paper to his chest, as if he had just been shot. What is it? Vivian demanded, grabbing the document from his hands. She read the bold print and let out a strangled gasp. That is a formal notice of foreclosure and immediate property seizure. I stated, my voice cutting clearly through the remaining noise in the room. When Trey needed capital to initiate the offshore transfers 3 years ago, you both co-signed his loans. You used your massive Buckhead estate as collateral. You bet the roof over your heads on his success. Vivian stared at the paper, her hands trembling so badly the document rattled. The bank cannot do this, she whispered. We have 30 days to appeal. The bank is not doing anything, I replied, leaning closer to them. Yesterday afternoon, my corporate entity, Aegis Forensics, purchased the secondary debt note on your property. I am your sole creditor now. And because you violated the morality clause in the original loan agreement, by tying the collateral to an active federal criminal investigation, I have the legal right to accelerate the foreclosure process immediately. Trey looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. You bought their house. I own your house, I corrected, looking directly at Vivian and Desmond. I own the driveway. I own the pristine landscaping. I own the dining room where you hosted your wealthy friends. And most importantly, I own the freezing front porch where you left me with a paper plate 3 years ago. Vivian's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the expensive carpet, sobbing uncontrollably. Desmond fell to his knees beside her, weeping and praying loudly. You have 48 hours to vacate my property, I commanded, turning my back on them and walking toward the exit. Leave the keys on the kitchen counter. If you take anything that belongs to the estate, I will have you arrested for theft. I walked out of the mediation room, leaving them to face the absolute ruin they had built for themselves. I stepped out of the federal courthouse into the bright Atlanta afternoon. The humid air hit my face, but I felt nothing but the crisp, absolute chill of victory. I slid into the back of my waiting vehicle. David sat across from me, his phone already buzzing with updates. We had ignited a catastrophic fuse. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission were already processing the massive binders Judge Harrison forwarded. Arrest warrants for financial crimes of that staggering magnitude take a little time to process, usually a few days to coordinate multiple federal agencies. But my family did not have a few days. They barely had hours before their entire reality collapsed. 24 hours later, the sun set over the city, casting long golden shadows across the glass skyscrapers of downtown. Tonight was the undisputed crown jewel of my parents' social calendar. It was the 30th anniversary of Desmond pastoral leadership at his massive congregation, combined with Vivian annual elite charity gala. They had rented the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel. Even knowing they were entirely bankrupt and facing imminent federal indictment, my family refused to cancel the event. The delusion of the Atlanta elite is a powerful narcotic. They actually believed that if they put on their finest clothes and smiled for the cameras, they could somehow outrun the massive tidal wave of consequences crashing down upon them. Or perhaps Vivian was simply desperate to collect the millions in charity pledges tonight to pay for the armada of criminal defense attorneys she was going to need by Monday morning. I sat in the back of my parked limousine across the street from the hotel entrance. My security chief, Marcus, sat in the front passenger seat, monitoring the live feed from the gala broadcast. The megachurch media team was streaming the event in high definition to thousands of devoted followers online. I watched the screen on my tablet, tracing the absolute absurdity of their performance. The ballroom was a grotesque display of tax-exempt wealth. Massive ice sculptures of doves flanked the main entrance doors. Cascading floral arrangements of imported white roses and rare orchids hung heavily from the crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of expensive champagne and caviar appetizers. The room was packed with the most influential figures in the city. Local politicians, minor celebrities, wealthy real estate developers, and the highest tithing members of Desmond congregation. And right in the center of the room, acting as if their entire world had not burned to ashes yesterday, were Vivian and Desmond. My mother wore a custom emerald green evening gown that swept across the polished floor. Her hair was immaculately styled, and a heavy diamond necklace caught the light of the flash photography. She was gripping a glass of champagne so tightly her knuckles were stark white. I could see the frantic terror hiding just beneath her heavy makeup. Her smiles were brittle, her laughter too loud and entirely hollow. She moved gracefully from table to table, soliciting massive donations for her supposed orphan relief fund, whispering praises and religious blessings to the wealthy donors, while silently calculating how to divert those funds to save her mansion. Desmond was currently on the main stage gripping a gold-plated microphone. He wore his finest custom-tailored suit, his pastoral voice booming across the grand ballroom. He was preaching about faith and resilience. He told the captivated audience about how the devil attacks the most righteous families trying to test their resolve. He preached passionately about overcoming sudden, unimaginable financial trials through the sheer power of community donations. I was literally passing a golden collection plate to fund his criminal defense. The congregation clapped and cheered, completely oblivious to the fact that their beloved pastor was 48 hours away from being thrown onto the street by his own daughter. Trey and Lauren were seated at the primary VIP table near the stage. They looked physically ill. Trey stared down at his untouched plate of filet mignon, his face glistening with a cold, nervous sweat. He kept glancing nervously toward the ballroom doors, flinching every time a hotel staff member walked past. He knew the federal agents were coming. He just did not know exactly when the trap would snap shut. Lauren sat stiffly beside him, her signature white privilege completely shattered into invisible shards. She was drinking heavily, downing her third glass of expensive wine in less than 20 minutes. Her wealthy father, Richard Davis, was conspicuously absent. The old money patriarch had likely abandoned them already, securing his own legal immunity and leaving his daughter and son-in-law to take the heavy federal fall. At the adjacent table, my younger sister Kelsey was busy taking selfies. She was completely oblivious to the radioactive danger surrounding her family. She angled her hand to catch the light on her massive diamond engagement ring, recording a live video for her followers. She talked excitedly about her upcoming luxury wedding, her planned honeymoon in the Maldives, and how blessed her life was. She had no idea that the money funding her lavish lifestyle was currently frozen by the federal government, and that her stunning wedding venue was about to cancel her reservation tomorrow morning due to non-payment. I watched the spectacle on my screen, feeling a profound sense of closure. They were dancing on the deck of a sinking ship, refusing to acknowledge the freezing water rising around their ankles. They were clinging desperately to the illusion of status, because without their stolen money and their fake morality, they had absolutely no identity left to claim. Marcus turned around in his seat, looking at me. "The final donor speeches are concluding, Ms. Brooks," he stated, checking his luxury watch. "The charity auction segment begins in exactly 5 minutes. The event organizers are preparing the stage to announce the anonymous top donor of the evening." I turned off my tablet and handed it to him. I looked down at my own attire. I was not wearing faded scrubs or cheap sneakers tonight. I wore a backless crimson silk gown, designed in Milan, that flowed perfectly around my silhouette. A single diamond choker rested against my collarbone. I looked like absolute power and undeniable wealth. I looked like the worst nightmare my family could possibly imagine stepping out of the dark. "It is time," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. Marcus opened the heavy limousine door. The humid night air wrapped around me as I stepped onto the pavement. My private security detail fell into formation flawlessly, creating a protective wedge around me as we approached the grand entrance of the Four Seasons. The valet staff scrambled out of the way, intimidated by the sheer force of our approach. I walked through the revolving glass doors and into the opulent hotel lobby. The faint sound of applause echoed from the grand ballroom down the hall. Vivian thought she could banish me to the freezing porch and pretend I never existed. Tonight I was not waiting outside for a paper plate of scraps. I was walking straight into the heart of her glorious palace to seize the crown. I marched down the carpeted hallway, ready to burn their beautiful illusion to the ground in front of every single person they spent their lives trying to impress. I pushed through the grand double doors of the ballroom without breaking my stride. The transition from the quiet hallway to the deafening roar of the gala was immediate. The string quartet playing on a raised platform near the ice sculptures faltered as the cellist caught sight of me. The jarring screech of the bow across the strings caused a ripple effect. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads began to turn one by one. I walked into the ballroom with slow, deliberate steps. The crimson silk of my gown moved like liquid fire against the stark white and gold decor Vivian had chosen. In a sea of conservative emerald greens, navy blues, and muted champagnes, I was a glaring, undeniable disruption. The whispers started almost instantly, rolling across the tables like a physical wave. The elite circles of Atlanta are small and highly observant. They recognized the facial features I shared with the pastor on stage, but they could not place me. I did not fit the narrative they had been fed. I was not the mentally unstable dropout hiding overseas. I was an apex predator crashing their sanctuary. On the main stage, Desmond was speaking. He was holding the golden microphone, raising one hand toward the crystal chandeliers. He was saying something about the Lord providing a path through the darkest financial valleys. Then his eyes locked onto me. His hand froze in midair. The booming pastoral voice died completely, leaving a heavy, awkward static humming through the massive speakers. He stared at me as if a ghost had just materialized in the center aisle. Vivian noticed the sudden silence on stage. She followed her husband's paralyzed gaze across the ballroom floor. When she saw me walking down the main aisle flanked by my private security detail, the color drained from her face so fast I thought she might actually faint. She dropped her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the polished marble floor, a sharp, piercing sound that echoed through the quiet room. Trey and Lauren whipped their heads around. Lauren gripped the edge of the VIP table, her knuckles turning white. Trey looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of the gallows waiting for the lever to pull. He knew exactly why I was here. He knew the federal agents were not far behind me. Vivian recovered her survival instincts rapidly. She could not let me reach the stage. She could not let me speak. She immediately signaled to the hotel security personnel stationed around the perimeter of the ballroom. She waved her hands frantically, pointing directly at me. I kept walking, my gaze fixed dead ahead. 3 hotel security guards in dark suits moved quickly to intercept me. They approached from the side aisles, stepping into the main pathway. "Excuse me, miss," one of the guards said, raising a hand to block my path. "This is a private charity event. We need to see your invitation, or we will have to escort you out of the ballroom immediately." Marcus stepped seamlessly between me and the hotel guard. He did not raise his voice, but the lethal authority in his posture made the hotel guard freeze. "My client is not going anywhere," Marcus stated firmly. Vivian rushed over her emerald gown, swishing frantically as she shoved her way past the wealthy donors. She arrived breathless, her eyes wild with panic. "Get her out!" she hissed at the hotel security guards, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing more attention, though half the room was already watching us. "She is an uninvited guest. She is a disturbed individual attempting to ruin a private religious gathering. Remove her from the premises right now before I call the police." The hotel security guard looked at Marcus and then at me. "Ma, I am going to have to insist." He started reaching for his radio. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I reached into my slim clutch and pulled out a solid black metal card. I handed it smoothly to Marcus, who held it up for the hotel security guards to see. It was not an invitation to the gala, it was a corporate access card linked to the primary ownership group of the hotel chain. Aegis Forensics managed the global cybersecurity infrastructure for the entire hospitality conglomerate. I was not just a guest. I was a top-tier corporate vendor with clearance that superseded the local event management. The head of hotel security leaned in to look at the card. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized the encoded security clearance. He immediately lowered his radio and took a step back. I apologize for the interruption. Ms. Brooks, the guard said, his tone shifting instantly from authoritative to completely subservient. Please let us know if you or your security team require any assistance this evening. The hotel guards quickly dispersed, melting back into the shadows of the ballroom perimeter. Vivian stared at the retreating guards in absolute disbelief. What are you doing? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. Come back here. I paid for this ballroom. I demand you remove her. I stepped closer to my mother. The scent of her expensive perfume was suffocating. They are not going to remove me, Vivian, I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You do not own this room. You just rented it with money you stole from your investors. And in case you forgot, your accounts are frozen. The check you wrote to this hotel is going to bounce tomorrow morning. Vivian grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. She leaned in close, her face contorted with pure venom. Why are you doing this? She whispered furiously. You already took the house. You already proved your point. Are you so bitter and jealous that you have to humiliate us in front of the entire church? We are your family. If you walk up to that stage and ruin this gala, God will strike you down. You will burn in hell for destroying your own father ministry. I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers until she realized how pathetic she looked and slowly let go. I am not ruining anything, Vivian, I replied, my voice echoing with icy precision. You built a magnificent castle out of lies and gasoline. I am just the person holding the match. I am here to claim exactly what belongs to me. I stepped around her, leaving her standing frozen in the middle of the main aisle. Desmond was still on the stage, watching me approach like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. The crowd parted for me, parting like the sea, as I walked confidently toward the front. The whispers grew louder, analyzing my dress, my security, and the sheer panic radiating from the pastoral family. The gala was supposed to be a celebration of their flawless legacy. Instead, they were about to witness the most spectacular public execution in the history of Atlanta high society. I reached the bottom of the carpeted stairs leading up to the main stage. It was time to announce the top donor of the evening. It was time to pull the trigger. I ascended the carpeted stairs with measured precision. The heavy silence of the grand ballroom pressed against my back. Desmond stood paralyzed behind the wooden podium. His knuckles gripped the edges of the lectern so tightly the skin stretched thin and white. He looked like a man watching the ocean recede just before a tsunami strikes. I did not wait for an invitation or an introduction. I simply reached out and took the gold-plated microphone directly from his trembling hand. He offered absolutely no resistance. His fingers yielded the heavy metal without a single fight. I turned to face the vast sea of Atlanta highest society. Hundreds of faces stared up at me. The elite donors, the politicians, the devoted megachurch congregation. They were waiting for a polished speech about grace and charitable giving. They were waiting to applaud the anonymous benefactor who had supposedly saved the evening. Good evening, I began, my voice amplified through the massive sound system. It echoed across the crystal chandeliers and the ice sculptures. I am sure many of you do not recognize me. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Morgan Brooks. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Forensics. I am also the youngest daughter of Pastor Desmond and Vivian Brooks. A collective gasp rippled through the front tables. The whispers ignited immediately. The narrative they had been fed for years was that the youngest Brooks daughter was mentally unstable, living overseas, or entirely estranged due to a tragic moral failing. My physical presence, elegant and commanding, instantly shattered that carefully constructed lie. For the past month, the organizers of this gala have been promoting an anonymous top donor. I continued gripping the microphone tightly. A benefactor who injected a massive sum of capital into the church financial holdings. Vivian and Desmond told you this money was a miracle. They told you it was divine intervention meant to secure the legacy of this ministry. I am the anonymous donor. The money did not come from heaven. It came directly from my corporate accounts. And it was not a charitable donation. It was a hostile financial takeover. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic murmur. Down at the VIP table, Lauren's face contorted in absolute horror. Trey buried his face in his trembling hands. Kelsey stopped filming her live stream, the phone dropping flat onto the white tablecloth. Vivian was frozen in the center aisle, looking like a fragile porcelain doll about to shatter into a million jagged pieces. Desmond finally found his voice. He lunged toward the microphone, his pastoral facade cracking violently. "Morgan, stop this madness right now. You are embarrassing the family. You are desecrating a holy celebration." I easily sidestepped his desperate grasp. Marcus, my security chief, stepped onto the stage, positioning his massive frame between my father and me. Desmond hit that human wall and stumbled backward, gasping for air. "There is no family to embarrass, Desmond," I said, my voice booming across the room, cutting through his frantic protests. "I am here to expose the undeniable truth. This entire gala is a massive fraud. The charity auction you are holding tonight is not designed to fund orphanages or build community centers. It is a desperate, illegal attempt to crowdsource the legal defense fund for your son." I pointed directly at Trey, who flinched as if I had shot him. 3 years ago, my brother Trey embezzled $15 million of investor capital to save his wealthy in-laws from bankruptcy. He laundered that money through offshore shell companies tied to an international criminal syndicate. And my parents, knowing exactly what he had done, used the deed to their massive Buckhead mansion as collateral to secure his fraudulent loans. They risked the roof over their heads and the financial stability of this church to cover up federal wire fraud. The crowd erupted completely. Deacons of the church stood up from their tables, shouting in absolute disbelief. Wealthy investors who had placed their money in Trey Fund pulled out their phones, frantically dialing their financial brokers. The polite, civilized atmosphere of the gala dissolved into sheer, unadulterated panic. Vivian shrieked from the floor. "She is lying. She is a sick, vindictive liar. Do not listen to her. We are innocent. We are servants of the Lord." "Are you Vivian?" I asked, staring down at her. "If I am lying, then why did your legal team frantically withdraw their lawsuit against my company yesterday afternoon? If I am lying, then why did the bank issue a formal notice of foreclosure on your estate this morning?" I reached into the bodice of my gown and retrieved a folded legal document. I held it up high for the entire ballroom to see. Yesterday afternoon, Aegis Forensics purchased every single secondary debt note tied to Trey Investment Fund and Lauren Family Real Estate Firm. We bought out the Delaware hedge funds. We became the sole creditors of your entire corrupt enterprise. I purchased the primary deed to the Buckhead mansion. I own the cars you drive. I own the property where you sleep. You are entirely, completely bankrupt. The silence that fell over the room this time was absolute. The heavy weight of the financial execution settled over the wealthy crowd. 3 years ago, you threw me out of your house on Christmas Eve. I stated, my voice dropping into a deadly quiet register that commanded the room. You handed me a paper plate and told me I was not clean enough to eat at your table. You sold my car to buy a wedding dress. You stole my dignity to protect your image. You told everyone I was a dropout. You told everyone I was worthless. Now the dropout owns the bank. The dropout owns the debt. The dropout owns your house. The illusion is completely over. I am calling in the debts, all of them, tonight. Look closely, Desmond. Look very closely, Vivian. You are finished." The sheer finality of my words hung over the grand ballroom. No one moved. The elite society of Atlanta was holding its breath, trapped in the gravitational pull of my victory. Then a sharp, panicked voice broke the silence. "Do not listen to her!" Kelsey shrieked, scrambling up from her table. She pushed past the frozen waitstaff. She rushed toward the stage, pointing a manicured finger at me. "She is a liar. She is just a bitter, jealous loser trying to ruin my wedding. She has been obsessed with destroying me since we were kids. I looked down at my younger sister. She was desperate to salvage her influencer image in front of the wealthy donors and her future in-laws seated just 2 tables away. Her fiancé looked completely bewildered, staring at the unfolding disaster. "I am not trying to ruin your wedding, Kelsey," I said into the microphone, my voice echoing with terrifying calm. "You did that entirely on your own." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my mobile device. I tapped a single button, syncing it directly to the ballroom massive audio-visual system. "Yesterday morning," I announced, "my sister called me from the country club. She offered to stop the fraudulent lawsuit her family filed against my company. But her intervention came with a very specific price tag." I pressed play. The crisp, high-definition audio of Kelsey's voice blasted through the overhead speakers, filling every corner of the Four Seasons ballroom. "You wire that money to my planner, or I walk back out to that brunch table and I tell Lauren to accelerate the asset seizure. I will watch them destroy you, and I will not lose a single second of sleep over it." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Kelsey's face drained of color. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. She looked frantically toward her fiancé table. Her future mother-in-law was already standing up, her face a mask of absolute disgust. The wealthy family was not going to attach their pristine legacy to a woman caught committing federal extortion on a recorded line. The fiancé took off his suit jacket, threw it over his chair, and walked rapidly toward the exit without giving Kelsey a single backward glance. His family immediately followed him out. "No," Kelsey sobbed, reaching out toward their retreating figures. "Please wait." She crumpled to the floor, weeping into her expensive hands, her own perfect wedding plans completely vaporized. But the destruction of my sister was merely the opening act. The main event was just arriving. The heavy brass doors at the back of the grand ballroom suddenly flew open with violent force. The sound made half the room flinch. A team of 20 federal agents poured into the space wearing tactical vests, emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They moved with terrifying coordinated precision, spreading out to secure all possible exits. "Nobody move," the lead agent barked, his voice easily carrying over the gasps of the wealthy donors. "Federal agents, keep your hands where we can see them." The elite crowd parted like the Red Sea, terrified of being associated with whatever was about to happen. The agents marched straight down the center aisle, bypassing Vivian and Desmond completely. They formed a tight, impenetrable circle around the VIP table. Trey did not even try to run. He sat frozen in his chair, his eyes wide with sheer animal panic, as 2 federal agents grabbed his arms and hauled him forcefully to his feet. They kicked his legs apart and patted him down before twisting his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoing in the silent room sounded like a guillotine dropping. Trey Brooks, the lead agent, stated, reading from a formal warrant. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." Lauren shrieked, batting her hands at the agents approaching her. "Get your hands off me! Do you know whom my father is? Call Richard Davis right now. He will have your badges for this outrage." A female agent grabbed Lauren's wrists, twisting them behind her back with practiced, brutal efficiency. The second set of handcuffs snapped shut, securing the wealthy heiress. "Your father is currently in federal custody in Delaware, Mrs. Davis," the agent replied coldly. "He accepted a plea deal this afternoon. He gave you both up to secure his own immunity. You are under arrest for racketeering and international money laundering." Lauren screamed, a piercing, guttural sound of absolute betrayal. Her own father had sacrificed her to save himself. The agents dragged Lauren and Trey down the main aisle, parading the handcuffed couple past the horrified stares of Atlanta's highest society. Flashbulbs went off as guests openly recorded the spectacular downfall of the city elite. On the stage, Desmond sank to his knees. The powerful pastor who had commanded thousands was reduced to a sobbing, broken shell. He buried his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably, as the agents hauled his golden child out the doors and into the waiting federal transport vans. Down on the ballroom floor, Vivian finally hit her absolute breaking point. The reality of her entire existence shattering simultaneously was too much for her mind to process. Her stolen mansion was gone. Her son was going to federal prison. Her daughter's wedding was destroyed. Her church legacy was permanently disgraced. She let out a horrific, agonizing wail that tore from the depths of her chest, echoing terribly against the crystal chandeliers. She grabbed her hair, ruining her immaculate styling, and dropped heavily to her shaking knees. The physical toll of her complete failure was overwhelming. Then her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed entirely, crashing face first onto the cold, polished marble floor. She lay completely motionless, surrounded by the shattered pieces of her broken crystal champagne flute. The ballroom remained paralyzed. Paramedics were not called. The wealthy elite stared down at Vivian Brooks as she lay motionless. They looked at her with creeping disgust. She was a contagious failure, and they were terrified of catching the disease. Nobody rushed forward to offer water. Nobody knelt to check her pulse. The people who praised her immaculate taste 30 minutes ago now took collective steps backward, putting physical distance between themselves and her spectacular ruin. I stood on the stage watching the absolute isolation of the woman who spent her entire adult life orchestrating the isolation of others. Desmond remained on his knees behind the wooden podium, weeping into his hands. He was a shepherd without a flock, a patriarch stripped of all unearned power. I handed the microphone to Marcus, who stood beside me. I gathered the gown and began to descend the carpeted stairs. My footsteps were the only distinct sound. I walked slowly, letting the agonizing reality press down on everyone present. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, Vivian began to stir. A pathetic moan escaped her lips. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees, her designer dress soaking up spilled champagne. Her pristine blowout was ruined, strands of hair sticking to her tear-streaked face. She looked up and saw me standing over her. Her eyes were bloodshot wide with the frantic realization that this was not a nightmare she could wake up from. Morgan, Vivian choked out her voice, a raw, ragged whisper. She reached a trembling hand toward the hem of my dress, but I took a deliberate step back, ensuring her fingers grasped empty air. Please, she begged, choking on her tears. You made your point. You destroyed us. Please do not take the house. Where will we go? We have nothing left. I looked down at the woman who birthed me, feeling an absolute void where a daughter love should have resided. You will go wherever destitute fraudsters go, Vivian. I replied, my voice devoid of pity. You will learn to navigate the public transit system. You will learn to budget for cheap groceries. You will experience the exact life you forced upon me when you locked me out in the cold. But I am your mother, she wailed, pressing her hands against her face. I gave you life. You cannot put your parents on the street. God will not forgive you for this cruelty. God has nothing to do with this, I stated firmly. This is simple mathematics and binding legal contracts. You signed the deed to your estate away to secure dirty money. You gambled your kingdom on your golden son, and you lost. There is no divine intervention coming to save you tonight. You are facing the direct consequences of your monstrous arrogance. Vivian's chest heaved with violent sobs. She looked around the room, seeking a single sympathetic face among her wealthy congregation. The donors turned their heads, refusing to make eye contact. Her social currency was bankrupt. She was completely alone. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. A sharp, concise sound that cut through her weeping. From the shadows near the ballroom entrance, my executive assistant walked forward. She moved with elegant precision, carrying something in her hands. The wealthy guests parted for her, watching with rapt attention. She approached the spot where I stood over my mother and stopped. She held out a simple, flimsy white paper plate. I took it from her hands. Sitting on the cheap cardboard was a single scoop of cold, dry turkey. Next to it rested a hard dollop of instant mashed potatoes and a plain, stale dinner roll. A plastic fork was shoved carelessly into the meat. I held the plate out, presenting it to the woman kneeling on the marble floor. Vivian stared at the paper plate. The recognition hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Her eyes dilated with absolute horror as the memory from 3 years ago resurrected itself in vivid detail. This is for you, I said, my voice echoing clearly, so the silent crowd could hear every single syllable. You have exactly 12 hours to vacate my property, but I am not an unreasonable woman. I brought you dinner. Vivian let out a choked gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. The poetic cruelty of the gesture shattered whatever fragment of sanity she had left. She remembered the freezing Christmas Eve. She remembered looking at my dirty uniform and handing me this exact meal before shutting the door in my face. "You can eat this out on the front porch of my mansion while you pack your bags," I continued, holding the plate steady. "I suggest you eat it quickly before the morning dew ruins the bread. Make sure you leave the property spotless, Vivian. The contractors are arriving tomorrow afternoon to begin renovations. I am converting your grand dining room into a computer lab. Your master suite is going to be a dormitory. I am turning your stolen estate into a fully funded scholarship foundation and housing center for at-risk youth. Kids who actually need a safe place to sleep will occupy the halls where you used to host corrupt parties." I dropped the paper plate. It landed on the marble floor right in front of her trembling knees. The plastic fork bounced with a pathetic hollow clatter. "Do not leave a mess," I ordered, staring down at her ruined face. "Enjoy your meal." I turned my back on my weeping mother. I did not look at Desmond. I did not look at the elite society members who were texting their lawyers and public relations managers. I walked straight down the center aisle of the grand ballroom, my security detail falling into perfect formation around me. The heavy brass doors loomed ahead. I pushed them open and stepped out into the cool, quiet hallway, leaving the suffocating wreckage of my family behind me. The heavy brass doors sealed shut, cutting off the frantic sounds of a dying dynasty. I walked through the hotel lobby with Marcus at my side, my posture perfectly straight. The valet brought my car around, and I slipped into the quiet sanctuary of the leather seats. As we drove through the neon-lit streets of downtown Atlanta, my phone remained entirely silent. For the first time in my life, nobody was demanding my compliance. I had surgically removed the cancerous tumor of my past, and the prognosis was total absolute freedom. The sun rose the next morning, illuminating a city fundamentally changed by the events of the previous night. I sat on the balcony of my penthouse sipping black coffee and watching the financial news networks. The arrest of Trey Brooks and Lauren Davis was the headline story across every major broadcast. Federal agents carting away the golden couple of Atlanta high society in handcuffs was irresistible television. The anchors detailed the massive money laundering operation and the swift collapse of the Davis and Sterling real estate empire. But the true devastation was unfolding on a much more personal level. Kelsey woke up to a reality she lacked the mental capacity to comprehend. Her lavish fairy tale wedding was dismantled before she even managed to wash the ruined makeup from her face. Her wealthy fiancé did not just break off the engagement. His old money family orchestrated a brutal and highly public execution of her social standing. They released a formal press statement to the local media severing all ties with the Brooks family, citing irreconcilable ethical differences. They made sure everyone in their elite circle knew they were the victims of a fraudulent association. But the humiliation did not stop there. The luxurious botanical garden venue where Kelsey was scheduled to marry sent a blunt email canceling her reservation due to the immediate freezing of all associated bank accounts. Her elite wedding planner dropped her as a client by 9 in the morning. Her carefully curated influencer lifestyle imploded within hours. The audio recording of her attempting to extort $200,000 from me had leaked to the press. Corporate sponsors scrambled to distance themselves. Fashion brands terminated her affiliate contracts. She went from a bride to be with a massive following to a toxic liability. Her comment sections were flooded with people mocking her extortion attempt, forcing her to permanently delete her entire digital presence. She had blackmailed her own sister for a party, and the universe responded by permanently revoking her invitation to high society. While Kelsey watched her digital empire evaporate, Desmond faced a much harsher physical reckoning. At 8 in the morning, the Board of Deacons at his megachurch convened an emergency meeting. These were wealthy, powerful men who guarded the reputation of their congregation with ruthless efficiency. They had watched their head pastor use the pulpit to solicit donations for a criminal defense fund. They had watched him lie to their faces. By 10 o'clock, Desmond arrived at the massive glass doors of the sanctuary he had built. He found his keycard deactivated. 2 armed security guards stood blocking the entrance. The chairman of the board met him on the steps, handing him a termination letter printed on heavy church letterhead. He was stripped of his pastoral title effective immediately. He was banned from the premises and ordered to surrender his church-provided vehicle. The congregation he had manipulated for decades turned their backs on him in unison. His name was physically unbolted from the marble sign out front before lunchtime. I was no longer a shepherd. He was a disgraced civilian standing on the sidewalk watching his entire legacy get tossed into a cardboard box. The final blow landed at precisely noon. My private security team, led by Marcus, arrived at the sprawling Buckhead estate to enforce the eviction notice. Vivian and Desmond had exactly 12 hours to vacate the premises, and time was officially up. Marcus walked through the grand foyer holding a clipboard. He stood in the center of the massive living room, watching my parents frantically shove their belongings into cheap plastic trash bags. They could not afford professional movers. Their accounts were frozen, their credit cards declined, and their wealthy friends had completely abandoned them. They were reduced to stuffing their designer clothes into garbage bags, like common thieves fleeing a crime scene. Vivian looked feral. She darted around the house trying to grab silver candlesticks and expensive vases. Marcus stepped forward gently but firmly, taking a crystal vase from her trembling hands. The property and its fixtures belong to Aegis Forensics. Mrs. Brooks, he stated, his voice devoid of any sympathy. You are permitted to take only personal clothing and basic toiletries. Everything else remains. Desmond dragged two heavy garbage bags toward the front door. His shoulders slumped, his pastoral dignity completely shattered. He did not say a word. He looked like a man who had finally realized the staggering weight of his own hypocrisy. He had preached about the consequences of sin for 30 years, and the devil had finally come to collect the ultimate debt. They loaded their trash bags into a rusted 10-year-old sedan that Desmond had managed to borrow from a distant relative. It sputtered and coughed, a pathetic replacement for the luxury vehicles they had driven just yesterday. Vivian stood in the driveway looking up at the massive mansion she had stolen from me, the house where she had hosted her elite galas and banished me to the freezing porch. She looked at the empty paper plate resting exactly where I had dropped it. The wind caught the edge of the flimsy cardboard, flipping it over onto the pristine manicured grass. It was the only piece of garbage on the entire estate. Marcus then locked the heavy iron gates behind their sputtering car. The false empire was completely demolished, leaving no trace of the monsters who built it. Marcus handed me the heavy ring of master keys. I stood in the center of the sprawling driveway, listening to the profound silence that had finally settled over the estate. There were no lingering echoes of Vivian screaming, no pastoral threats from Desmond. The oppressive, toxic atmosphere that had suffocated this property for years evaporated entirely, leaving behind nothing but the clean, crisp breeze of a new beginning. I walked up the sweeping stone steps to the front entrance. I did not pause at the doorway. I stepped inside the grand foyer, my heels echoing sharply against the imported marble. The house was entirely empty, stripped of the ridiculous, opulent facade my parents had meticulously curated. The walls where Vivian had hung massive portraits of her flawless family were now blank, leaving behind faint rectangular outlines in the paint. The grand dining room where they had feasted on expensive catering, while I shivered in the cold, was reduced to a cavernous echo chamber. I walked slowly through the vacant spaces, feeling an immense, overwhelming sense of peace. I was not walking through a home. I was walking through a conquered battlefield, and I was the sole, undisputed victor standing on the ashes. I stepped back out onto the front porch. I looked down at the exact spot where Vivian had placed that flimsy paper plate 3 years ago. The memory of the freezing wind biting through my thin janitorial uniform flashed through my mind, but it carried absolutely no pain anymore. It was just a factual record of my origin story. Tomorrow morning, a team of commercial contractors would arrive at these gates. They would tear down the heavy mahogany doors and replace them with reinforced glass. They would convert the extravagant dining room into a state-of-the-art server laboratory. The master suite where Vivian had plotted her social conquests would become a dormitory for resilient, brilliant young girls who had aged out of the foster care system. The House of Lies was going to become a fortress of genuine opportunity. I was taking the darkest memory of my life and weaponizing it into a beacon of absolute power for others. Over the next few weeks, the media frenzy surrounding my family, spectacular downfall, slowly faded into the background noise of the city. The elite circles of Atlanta quickly found new scandals to consume. People often asked me if I felt any regret. They asked if I would eventually visit my brother in federal prison, or if I would ever reach out to my parents now that they were living in absolute poverty. Society has a deeply ingrained obsession with the concept of unconditional forgiveness. We are conditioned to believe that blood requires us to eventually open the door, no matter how many times the people on the other side have tried to burn our house down. I firmly rejected that conditioning. I did not forgive Vivian or Desmond. I did not forgive Trey or Kelsey. Forgiveness implies a restoration of grace, and they had not earned a single ounce of my grace. More importantly, I realized that I did not need to forgive them in order to heal. I simply needed to render them completely irrelevant. I detached my emotional cable from their sinking ship and let them plummet to the bottom of the ocean. My heart was not hardened or bitter. It was just permanently closed to them. I had excised the infection, and the surgical wound had healed flawlessly into a thick, impenetrable scar. I returned my focus entirely to my empire. Aegis Forensics expanded its global footprint, securing massive federal contracts to hunt down the exact type of financial predators my brother had become. My team, the brilliant, loyal misfits who had stood by me when I was just a startup founder, operating out of a rented garage, became my genuine family. We did not share DNA, but we shared absolute mutual respect. We celebrated our victories without hidden agendas or toxic competition. When I walked into the boardroom now, I was not bracing myself for a psychological attack. I was surrounded by a phalanx of brilliant minds who valued my intellect and protected my blind spots. I had successfully replaced the chaotic, treacherous bloodline I was born into with a highly functioning, fiercely loyal family of my own choosing. I walked down the steps of the estate and approached my waiting vehicle. Marcus held the rear door open for me, his expression conveying a deep, silent respect. I paused for one final moment, resting my hand on the polished frame of the open car door. I looked back at the massive stone facade of the mansion. The evening sun was beginning to set, casting a brilliant golden light across the property. The shadows of the past were completely eradicated by the sheer blinding illumination of the present. I had arrived at this house 3 years ago, begging for a seat at their table. When they denied me that seat, I did not just build my own table. I bought the entire building, evicted the previous owners, and changed all the locks. I slid into the leather interior of the car. Marcus closed the door with a solid thud. The engine purred to life, sending a powerful vibration through the floorboards. "Take us back to headquarters, Marcus." I commanded, my voice steady and full of absolute resolve. "We have a global launch tomorrow morning, and I want to review the final code before the press conference." The vehicle accelerated smoothly, pulling away from the estate and gliding onto the main road. I watched the Atlanta skyline rise up before me, a sprawling metallic jungle of endless, beautiful possibilities. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the architect of my own absolute destiny. I drove forward into the vibrant, neon-lit night, accelerating toward a brilliant, self-made future, and I never looked back at them ever again. The core lesson from Morgan's journey is that your worth is never defined by those who fail to see it, even if they are blood relatives. True power comes not from seeking revenge, but from reclaiming your narrative and building your own extraordinary success. When a toxic environment tries to break you, the most devastating response is to rise above it, become completely self-sufficient, and establish unbreakable boundaries. Family is not merely about DNA, it is about mutual respect, loyalty, and unwavering support. Sometimes walking away from those who handed you scraps is the first step to building your own empire. If you have ever had to set firm boundaries to protect your peace and build your own table, share your experience in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe for more empowering stories.